My brother stole my inheritance, but he didn't know I had proof. I never thought I would one day have to say something like that about my own brother. For years, I believed that no matter what happened in life, we would always be able to trust each other. I grew up thinking that family was the one place where no one betrays you, where the problems of the outside world stay outside the door. But there is a truth I learned far too late. Sometimes the people who can hurt you the most are the ones who share your blood. My brother Daniel and I grew up in a small house at the end of a quiet street. It wasn't luxurious or impressive, but to us it meant everything. Every corner carried a memory: the marks on the wall where my father measured our height every birthday, the old wooden table where my mother insisted we eat dinner together every night, and the backyard where we spent hours playing as children. Our father was an extremely hard-working man. He woke up every day before the sun came up, made coffee in silence, checked some numbers in an old notebook, and then left for work with almost obsessive punctuality. He rarely talked about money, but everyone knew he was someone who planned the future carefully. For decades, he worked without stopping. He was never the kind of person who spent money on luxuries. His philosophy was simple: save, build something stable, and make sure his family would be protected when he was no longer around. My mother, on the other hand, was the heart of the house. She was warm, protective, and always found a way to keep us together even when things got difficult. If my brother and I argued, she was the one who sat us down in the living room and made us talk until we found a way to work things out. For many years, that dynamic worked, but Daniel was always different from me. While I was more reserved and followed the rules, he had a much more risky personality. He liked making impulsive decisions, chasing quick opportunities, and looking for paths that promised easy money or immediate success. When we were young, those differences seemed small, just two different personalities growing up under the same roof. But over time, those differences started to grow, much bigger than any of us imagined. Daniel was the first to leave home. He was barely 20 when he decided he no longer wanted to live under our father's rules. I remember that night perfectly. The argument started in the kitchen and ended with my brother slamming the front door so hard the windows shook. After that, our relationship changed. We were still brothers, but we were no longer as close as before. He began jumping from job to job. Sometimes he talked about new projects that were supposedly going to make him rich. Other times he disappeared for weeks without giving much explanation. I chose a different path. I studied, found a stable job, and tried to build a quiet life. It wasn't spectacular, but it was secure. Meanwhile, our parents continued living in the same house where we had grown up. Over the years, my father started talking more often about the future, about how he had organized his savings, his properties, and everything he had managed to build after decades of hard work. At the time, those conversations seemed normal, just a father trying to leave things in order for his family. But what none of us knew was that those decisions about money and inheritance would reveal something very dark about my brother, something that would completely change the way I saw my own family. Because when I finally discovered what Daniel had been doing, I realized he hadn't just taken something that didn't belong to him. He had been betraying all of us. And the worst part was that he was convinced no one would ever be able to prove it. But what Daniel didn't know was that I had proof. My father's illness began almost imperceptibly. At first, it was small things. He forgot where he had left his car keys, repeated the same story during dinner, or stared at the wall as if trying to remember something important that kept slipping from his mind. My mother was the first to notice. After several medical visits, we received the diagnosis: a degenerative illness that would slowly take away his independence. It was a difficult moment for all of us, but what surprised me the most was Daniel's reaction. My brother, who hadn't been around for months, suddenly started visiting much more often after hearing the news. At first, I thought it was a good sign. Maybe the diagnosis had awakened the sense of family he had lost years earlier.
He came on weekends, talked with my father, asked about his health, and even helped around the house. My mother was happy. She said the two brothers were finally close again. But there was something about Daniel's behavior that made me uneasy. I couldn't explain it exactly. Maybe it was the way he asked certain questions, questions that seemed too specific about my father's bank accounts, documents, and old properties. One day, he even asked directly if my father had a will and where it was kept. My father answered naturally that it was in the drawer of his desk. At the time, I didn't think much about it, but that detail would become the beginning of everything. Over the next few weeks, Daniel started spending more time in my father's study. He said he was organizing papers or reviewing bills, but one afternoon I caught him searching through the desk drawers when he thought no one was watching. When he saw me, he quickly closed everything and said he was looking for a receipt. That was the moment something inside me changed. I started paying attention. A few days later, I checked the drawer where my father kept his important documents and discovered that the will was gone. When I asked my father, he insisted he always kept it there. No one had an explanation, but I knew Daniel had been alone in that office several times. Then I remembered something important, the security cameras we had installed in the house the year before. I checked the recordings and found exactly what I feared. Daniel walking down the hallway when he thought no one was watching, entering the study, and later leaving with a folder in his hands. Another recording days later showed him entering with a backpack and leaving it fuller than before. I saved the footage. I didn't want to accuse him without solid proof, so I waited. I knew that if Daniel had taken the document, sooner or later he would have to use it, and he did. About a week later, he showed up at the house with a folder full of papers and pulled out the will in front of everyone. He started saying it was unfair, that my father had made a mistake, and that I had manipulated him. But then I asked a simple question. How did he get the document? When I mentioned the cameras and showed the recordings, his confidence collapsed. Eventually, he admitted he had taken it. He tried to justify it by saying the will was unfair and that he only wanted to fix it. But things got worse when I revealed he had taken the document to a notary in an attempt to change it. The argument became intense, and Daniel left the house furious, saying we didn't know what he was capable of yet. After that, my father decided to contact his lawyer to protect the will. We thought that would be the end of it, but Daniel went even further. He left a legal notice saying he would challenge the will, claiming that my father had been manipulated. He also sent messages accusing me directly. But the recordings, the notary visits, and every step he had taken were already documented. When the lawyers reviewed the evidence, the story Daniel was trying to build began to fall apart very quickly. A few days later, he returned to the house. This time, he didn't look defiant, just exhausted. He said his lawyer had advised him to withdraw the challenge because continuing would be a mistake. He admitted everything had gotten out of control. My father looked at him in silence before saying something I will never forget. It wasn't the money that disappointed him, it was the trust. Daniel had no answer for that. He apologized quietly and left the house. When the door closed behind him, the feeling was strange. We had avoided a bigger legal battle, but something in the family had broken. That day, I learned a lesson I will never forget. Family may share blood, but trust is built through the choices each person makes. And sometimes, proof reveals far more than words ever could.